Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to wait another 30 seconds or so as people filter in with their connections and what have you. Right, let's kick off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pulsar's first webinar of 2023, Decoding Behavior Through Social Search and Audience Data. We've got some really exciting things to show you today, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you. So if you have any questions as we go along, please do pop them in via the Q&A box, and we'll be addressing them at the end primarily, maybe some during if they come up. And this webinar is being recorded for anyone who has to unexpectedly pop off halfway through or anything like that. So don't worry, that recording will come through to your inbox soon. So let's begin, let's dive in. So I'm Morton, I'm content marketing lead here at Pulsar, and I'm joined here by the wonderful Oryelle Clements, who is a research director here at Pulsar, coming from a behavioral science background. In her work, she's constantly returns to the question of how people's behaviors and motivations can be understood, particularly in the seemingly boundaryless online space. She's going to be sharing with some incredible research that I'll talk you through shortly. So first up, I'll be just giving you an introduction, a little bit about Pulsar, just for context for anyone who doesn't really know exactly who we are or want to know a little bit more about the context for today's research. I'll then take you through a research whistle-stop tour with some behavior snapshots. Then I'll be taking you through some in-depth case studies that show a little bit more detail about this audience behavior research that we'll be showing you today. And then we get really right into it with the incredible research from Oryelle, which is conducted using the COMBI model of behavior. And all research here like snapshots in time. So I want you to kind of take that into consideration. There's notes under each graphic about when that time frame was. So sometimes these are snapshots of a few months or a few years. On rare occasions, we'll even do them hour to hour over a few days, but I don't think I've got any of those to show you today. So first up, let's just give you a little overview of Pulsar. So all the data you're about to see is from Pulsar. Don't you worry, I'm not just going to read out the slides to you. I'd never do that to you. That's so boring. But what is Pulsar? So at Pulsar, we gather conversational data from all across the internet, social sources such as Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Reddit, many more. We also offer other sources such as Google search, online news, forum, blogs, broadcast data, television, and even radio. So we're all about offering the opportunity to see conversations on the internet and realize the impossible task of reading the internet. So this allows brands to analyze their audience and its sub-audiences, as well as answer discrete audience-based questions. We have all that and more in our platform, and we have an in-house research department as well that acts as like a consultancy on top of that. So here are just a few of the clients we've helped out recently. As you can see, no two use cases are the same. And yes, if you're interested in hearing about some of the ways you can utilize Pulsar, just take a look at the resources page on our website or get in touch following this webinar. So the product itself has three facets. These are Trends, which is Google Trends for social media and the news. Track, which is an audience intelligence tool that marries social listening and audience segmentation. And Core, which is a tool to monitor your own audience growth and content performance on your own channels. So audience behavior. We want to know what's driving your audience's behavior, but why? So simply watching your brand lags behind. Decoding behaviors enables your brand to anticipate and peer into the future. So before we dive into the specifics of how we've been analyzing audience behavior, let's just see why it's so important. And I hope that this webinar will show you why it's so important. So audience behavior obviously refers to the actions and reactions of your target audience. It's the way they respond to your marketing efforts, what motivates them to make purchasing decisions, what factors influence their daily routine behavior as well, and many more things. So by gaining knowledge about your audience's behavior, you can create messages that are effective, engaging, tailored to the specific needs of your audience. You can grab and hold the attention of your audience and magnetize them towards your brand or your project. So this can help improve the effectiveness of marketing campaigns, surely, but ultimately it will drive better business results. Our main thing that we want to talk about today is its use in anticipating. So it can anticipate future reactions and behaviors. And obviously we're going to go into much more depth on this throughout the webinar. So in short, understanding your audience behavior is key for any business as it helps you anticipate the future of your brand and make those informed decisions. So it's a no-brainer for any business or organization with a goal that needs to be using audience analysis to look at audience behavior. So with that said, let's dive into the specifics of how we can decode and analyze your audience's behavior and how it can help you anticipate and plan for the future of your brand. So these are the behavior snapshots that I told you about earlier. These are hopefully going to give you a sample of what can be done to understand culture, humans, and how that can affect brands. So these may feel like I'm skipping over key details about context of these charts, but I promise you to bear with me because these are to give you a little overview of the kinds of behaviors that we can use Pulsar to seek out. So first off, we're going to talk about cancelled subscriptions. So subscription model is obviously a fixture of modern economy, streaming, even meal boxes like HelloFresh, gym memberships among the services that have actually tripled in Google search interest over the past decade, which is obviously quite incredible. So more subscriptions obviously means more churn. It's an interesting business model. We're all seeing what's happening with Netflix at the moment and its video competitors. And as you can see here, cancelled subscriptions in video are the most popular. So cost of living crisis is leading to a lot of cancelled subscriptions, cancelled direct debits. And yes, it creates a hierarchy of need and people reevaluate their relationships with these services. So here we can see where audiences' pain points are, whereabouts in their lives they are wanting to cut the pennies in response to an external stimuli, cost of living crisis. So it's very interesting to see where this is causing restrained spending, and data like this could be used to anticipate areas of the business that are at risk of decline in the short to medium future. We're now going to talk about infladating. So it's a phrase that no one might have heard of. I hadn't heard of it until our wonderful teammate Di found this phenomenon. So this is the conversation of infladating, which is around the expense of dating in a cost of living crisis. So, as this sample tweet says here about kind of cheaper dates. We use Pulsar Trends to identify this behavior as part of our cost of living trends series. So this is a new behavior, which is very interesting because a new behavior means that there is very little written about it. There's little information to be found about it. And this shows one of the most exciting things we're always really interested to see here at Pulsar: a spike in social followed by a spike in search interest. This indicates that social conversation can offer a glimpse into the future of that search interest. And kind of, as we know, search interest is very closely related to what people are doing in the present, what they want to do in the immediate future. So this shows that following spikes in social conversation can help anticipate real life behaviors of the future. Thinking about the future, let's take a look at sustainability and climate change briefly. So why do people engage in sustainability related behaviors? As seen before within the problem solution dichotomy, it's largely positive motivators such as hope and self-worth that are referred to here. Habit also appears as a powerful factor within long-term behavioral change. So what are these new behaviors? To look on the right, it's ethical consumption, which is, say, buying green or ethical products. Also things such as eating less meat, maybe going vegan, growing your own food, things like this, behaviors that are emerging to the foreground from a desire to create maybe less waste or unwanted goods. So understanding the emotions propelling these behaviors offers a key insight into the behaviors that will follow. So turning to another emotionally charged subject, I don't know if anyone's ever been in a particularly uproarious group chat argument or some consternation happening within our group chats. So like any social situation, the emotional stakes are high surrounding group chats. We see a lot more conversation around leaving a group chat than muting or joining it. So like with many new digital spaces, social codes are undefined. The proper etiquette around them is still being worked out. So predictably, queries and questions around the group chats feature prominently in the subreddit Am I the Asshole, which people may be familiar with. I don't know if I should have asterisked that, but oh well, here we go. Where posers posit the titular question along with a relational situation they're going through. And we saw a lot of this in our group chat search. So it's clear that group chats are a social phenomenon whose relative use sparks many debates about its proper use. due to its online-only nature, the equilibriums of social norms don't really get talked about. So later in an in-depth case study, we'll be looking at how emerging technologies like this create new unseen behaviors online. Another disruptive behavior changing piece of tech is AirPods. So they've impacted the consumer headphone market for good. I like to think of myself as not an Apple fan, but here I am on my MacBook with my AirPods in, using my iPhone as a second screen. So I think it's fair to say that it's a very pervasive brand that really disrupts the market in a way that no other brand does. So here we see the AirPods association with different activities in online conversations. So the sport, gym, working out, really heavily associated with the AirPod there, but also having unique uses too, being for headphones first being used on public whilst doing chores, for example, and whilst doing work. And we can zoom into this conversation to see indications of other associations too. If you take a look at some of these sample tweets, people are experiencing embarrassment or even inhibition from wearing their AirPods. So AirPods have caused consumers to do things like dancing whilst you're on your dog walk in the bottom right there, that they wouldn't otherwise be feeling, potentially. So people's relationship to products change over time. So similarly, energy and protein bars have gone mainstream. So they used to be associated with potentially, space food for astronauts and, natural disaster, high density calorie bricks. But now they're being synonymous with athletes, workouts, snacks, growing into a multi-billion-dollar market. The ubiquity of the bars has been accompanied by a divergence, though, in how consumers perceive and consume them. So gamers, children, and communities are discussing calorie consumption are amongst the main groups either engaging with these or popularly associated with these categories. So there is no for one consumer type or one category of perception here. This is something key to what we're going to be revisiting throughout the webinar. There's no single motivation to eat a protein bar. This observation could act as a springboard to further analysis into motivation. Motivating factors are really interesting in how we examine a relation to a behavior. So here we have people who are choosing to buy a low or non-alcoholic beverage whilst they're out, and why. So being placed in a social setting or the desire to live healthier are kind of these main drivers to drink a reduced alcohol beverage, but not that the two are exclusive. Obviously, there's a lot of different combinations where people may make these choices. So some of these drivers, such as religious or ethical beliefs, are the thousands of years old, predictable behaviors, but others like mindful drinking or seeking to pace yourself are things that would have found little purchase in previous generations. So understanding these motivations and where motivation categories are changing or growing or shrinking is key to making the right choice for your brand. So that brings us to search data, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. So here's a chart that takes a look at the most common can questions that were used in conjunction with electric vehicles. And I'll later discuss in more detail about search question data. But here we've taken it and reflected it back into the social forums news data set to see just how important these questions are. And I think the answer here is clear. It's all about, can I charge my car and will it catch on fire? Which is very interesting to see. So at the top of this, we saw of the case studies, these little behavioral insights, taking search data in conjunction with social, like the inflating trend line I showed you, can be a super helpful way to measure up where your audience's pain points lie, because these pain points are often blockages to a desired behavior or outcome for you. So, right, that was a lot of me bombarding you with a lot of different mini case studies, little behavioral snapshots there. Let's slow it down a bit and delve into some case studies that allow us to really analyze our audience's behavior more in depth. So first, we're going to look at this concept of on repeat. So I would imagine that everyone is familiar with the idea of consuming media on repeat. You may think, oh, this has been something that I've always had in my mind. Well, that's at least for me. But when I took this search, I realized we can see here that repetitious consumption of media started its takeoff in 2009, pretty much. Before this, we barely see any mention in our channels of this as a concept, or at least culturally as a behavior. So, and we see right at the launch of on repeat, we see the launch of Spotify there. So here we have kind of technology as a motivator. So prior to this, perhaps listening on repeat would have involved a difficulty, maybe rewinding a tape, even pushing the CD back to the beginning, or pressing another button on your iPod to get that album to go again. Where Spotify enables this behavior, it makes the line clearer. It clears the path to that new behavior. So we see this technology or service as the birthplace of a now commonplace behavior. We analyzed the audience that led to the conversation around on repeat. You'll see a few more of these charts as we go through, and I'll give you a bit more information each time, and so will Oryelle. So we can visualize the sub-audiences and their interconnectivity. So this shows the distinct groups and how they behave with each other. So the lines represent the interconnection between the different members of the segments, and the bigger the node itself is, the more connected it is to the rest of the members in the audience that's been analyzed. And you can see here that there are very distinct different profiles of personality type that are here. So when we examine these sub-audiences further, we can see a huge difference among them in their on-repeat behavior and what they are doing on repeat. So NPR listeners, much more likely to be repeating while studying, and pop stands are linking their repetition to downtime. So these nuances can be used to infer key points about behavior in your sub-audiences, where best to focus your brand's attention and where to focus attention in the future. So now let's take a look at a more recent emerging phenomenon in tech, which is AI image generation, which is AI art. It's quite a divisive subject where the user will type in a prompt and the AI itself creates the image. These are some examples on the left there with the prompt. Pikachu at the Last Supper is particularly haunting. I hope that no one ends up dreaming about that tonight. So the art of prompting is difficult. Here we have some very simple prompts there. But if you wanted to control the AI to get exactly the result you want, so say that you wanted to make that image on the bottom left cute, how would one go about that? Or, maybe not terrifying in any way. So here the behavior of prompting is more important to users online than the highly controversial act of buying and selling AI art. So let's break it down further, shall we? So again, we analyze the sub-audiences here, leading the AI image generation. You can see the range of people encapsulated. One would imagine that NFT collectors engage in AI imaging in a very different way to arty meme fans, for example. So when you kind of think that theory, we put it on a heat map to visualize it. So as we can see here, yes, each individual group here holds really different emphasis on these behaviors. So prompting here, this kind of emerging technology is giving rise to this new behavior of prompting, which is the act of talking to AI and how to do that best, or how to kind of control that situation best. So many people haven't heard of this behavior yet, but these conversation leaders online are kind of holding great importance on it. However, 3D art devs and NFT collectors are much more interested in the creation of AI art and the purchasing and selling than prompting as a concept and as a behavior. So we maybe move to think about why these sub-audiences aren't engaging in that behavior themselves, why that's not an interesting behavior to them. And if these principles were applied to branding, they could be used to anticipate audience behavior in response to a set of criteria, a set of behaviors. And again, analyzing current behavior being used to find future reactions. So a great way to gain insight is search questions. So here are the search questions around AI art. We can see a lot of general questions, how AI art works, can AI art be copyrighted, things like this, why AI art is bad. I told you it's controversial. I'm not saying I'm for or against it here. Questions here indicate that, some users are wanting to engage in AI art, but can't find the means to do so. What AI art is everyone using? Which AI art generator is best? How can I get myself in here? How can I engage in these behaviors? These are kind of where we can learn where pain points are and behavior blockages are. So let's have a look at these different models at the top. So Mid-Journey, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, and Night Cafe, they're all different. I guess maybe a good way to put it would be like brands, or they're called models, kind of different ways to create AI art, different websites, places to create AI art, basically. So we can see where each has different varying brand profiles. So Mid-Journey and DALL-E, I'll kind of scroll through these. So Mid-Journey and DALL-E, they are associated with commercial utilization. How can AI images be used commercially? Showing potential work-based or sale-based behavior pattern associated with these brands. However, Stable Diffusion is working. I have a question around working with AMD, which I'm no computer expert, but I think it's a type of graphics card. So this is people that are running Stable Diffusion on their own computers, potentially adding tweaks, developing it themselves. Highly technical behavior compared to other models. So yes, we can see that search data is key for examining behavior and brand profile. So here we look at the concept, the phrase my aesthetic. My aesthetic, which is an online concept primarily amongst younger people of having a coherent image that abides to a set of visual and aesthetic rules. So in the past, we may have thought of these like subcultures, maybe like goths or mods, but those have specific behaviors or maybe hobbies attached to them. However, aesthetics are much more specific and on the face of it, entirely focused on looks. However, when we can see this reflected in the search data here, this questions around identity, wanting to fit in, they're really interesting. But of course, humans cannot help forming habits and behaviors. This is true, of course, of individuals, but when those individuals form a group and are communicating regularly online, endlessly, ceaselessly, this happens among groups as well. So here's just an example of some of the aesthetics here. I think this is quite a fun spread. I mean, you may have heard of, obviously this is just a snapshot in time. I imagine these trends change very quickly. You may have heard of cottagecore, but never have heard of old money aesthetic. I hadn't heard of loads of these. But these are birthed as visual identities only. They're kind of highly associated with fashion, as I'll show you later. But we start to see behavioral associations lying underneath. Now let's look at some of them now. So cottagecore is a romanticized look at a rural living from like a youthful point of view. So we find that cottagecore has an association with yarn-based activities such as crochet and knitting. A really interesting point here is that the vernacular is spilling out of the aesthetic into describing the action itself. So Tom Daley is not dressed here in the top right in any cottagecore aesthetic, far from it. He's in his Team GB athletic gear. However, his action is being described as cottagecore, which is very interesting. Moving on to dark academia here, which is a visual aesthetic that combines Gothic looks with an American preppiness. It's seen to have a conflation with literature, both reading and writing. So here we see the conflation of a dark academia aesthetic with writing fiction. These authors are young authors. They are maybe from the ground up. This is very Gen Z trend that we're seeing here, not to generalize Gen Z, but these authors are advertising their own work by tying it to an aesthetic of visual appeal to target the correct group. So let's just look at three more quite quickly. So Barbiecore here has been, which is a hyper pink, hyper feminine aesthetic, has been associated with marijuana, which is something very far from Mattel's image of Barbie. Clean girl aesthetic is focused on no makeup and kind of daintiness. Let's not get into that. But is associated with gym going, relaxing, and prioritizing health, both mental and physical. And Y2K focuses on replicating the trends of the early noughties, primarily by people who are too young to remember those years, and also encapsulates something that its Gen Z adherers are craving, which quote here, very cool offline experiences, living in the moment and having tech-free experiences. So finally, we can attach these aesthetic identities to industries, verticals. Let's have a look here. So we can see that Y2K has associations mainly in fashion, but also with a healthy spread of other things. Cottagecore has a big fascination with both interiors and fashion. So this research here links the behavior of crochet with the vertical of interior design, which is very interesting. It's not something that would initially be made. And the dark academia has a huge focus on fashion, which is a kind of shows a unique way that the fashion industry and books, literature, writing can be linked. And perhaps this finally explains the really naff book section at Urban Outfitters. So with that horrible joke, it's now time to pass over to one of the brightest minds of Pulsar, Oryelle Clements, who's going to go in depth about some combi-based research. I'm really excited. I've seen this presentation. I'm really excited for you guys to see it as well. It's absolutely wonderful, the depth that Oryelle goes into here. So looking at a behavioral lens, Oryelle was able to feature scientifically validated methods to find a successful group to be reached for this particular client. So I think without any further ado, I'm just going to hand over to you. Thank you. Take it away, Oryelle.
Thank you very much. And I quite like the Evernote footage joke. Don't apologize for it. So thank you. This report that we're looking at, I did, as you can see, in 2021, so a little while ago now. And one of the reasons it was so interesting to look at from a research point of view is that whilst I, coming from a behavioral science background, always try to look kind of beyond data and understand how people are choosing to behave, how they're communicating their behaviors online. It's often kind of add-on, it's often just me being a bit of a nerd and going into the data a bit rigorously. Whereas this report, it was a kind of specific request from the client, which was really interesting to be able to take it and really understand what models and methodologies we could use. So to actually explain what the report is, please, next slide, thank you. The company that came to Pulsar is or certainly was a brand that was launching an app that was going to use a variety of methods to help people minimize drinking behaviors. And whilst they saw really high engagement on all of their kind of like social media tweets, their marketing team was doing an excellent job. So they were able to get a large number of downloads. What they were noticing is that the unsubscription rate was also very high. There was a very high churn rate in the people who were downloading the app. So they were clearly successful in reaching people who wanted to change their behavior with alcohol. They wanted to facilitate the app and this company to support them in that endeavor, but clearly it wasn't the right kind of support that was being offered. So what this company wanted to do was understand who first of all, out of the audiences that they were reaching, who was someone that really actively wanted to seek behavior change, someone who really wanted to, they were looking at their own self and saying, actually, I need to change this up in a very active, focal way, versus those who are perhaps earlier on in their journey in relation to alcohol. And then secondly, they wanted to understand how they could best support those people. So how could they best support the people who are downloading the apps? What could they communicate? What could they highlight, etc. So it's really, this whole report became understanding behaviors, not only around drinking, but also behavior change, people actively looking to facilitate a habit break. And as we all know, as we come to the end of January, that is often a very, very difficult thing to do. Next slide, please. Amazing. So the first thing we did, which we've already touched upon, was do an audience analysis. Well, we looked at those with problematic drinking behaviors, and I'm just going to call them ARCs. This stands for alcohol relationship change seekers. It's far too long for me to say repeatedly. We looked at their conversation on Twitter, very specifically looking at people who were saying, I want to change my behavior. Can someone help me change? I'm getting to a point where this is difficult for me and I want to be facilitated or incentivized, et cetera, et cetera. As you can see, the audience map on the side there, the color represents each community. The lines represent the kind of actual physical connection that those communities have, and the distance each community has from one another represents the kind of physical difference or dissimilarity of those communities. So the two highlighted here, blue is very, very different from orange, whereas perhaps more similar to red. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what we did find is, perhaps unsurprisingly, the ARCs audience and the problematic drinking audience were very, very similar in regards to things like demographics, in terms of gender breakdown, kind of where they were in the world, their top bio keywords. So again, this isn't hugely surprising, right? People who have communicated that perhaps drinking isn't something that is good for them are similar to those who have communicated that their relationship with alcohol is something that they want to change. It's only one small step. So what we can understand here is that the behaviors that they're exhibiting aren't down to demographics. It's not like with Sal's previous examples where it's a gender that's more likely to incentivize change, or a type of age group. This is something that they are very, very similar. So the behaviors that they're exhibiting are down to more nuanced reasons. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm going to go past this slide rather quickly, but essentially we broke down the audience into a number of subcategories or segments. And one thing that was really interesting about working within the alcohol space was just how vast and like kind of wide encompassing the different segments could be. I'm very used to, I don't know, working in the fashion space and trying to really understand the different nuances between different groups of people, whereas this was something that I was able to understand Christian conservatives versus, say, LGBT Democrats, or self-growth starters versus artists. Like, it was a very wide encompassing, which meant that first of all, it made me realize how alcohol really is something that is very, very present in a lot of our lives, unless we sort of actively choose to not participate. But also how it interacts with us in very different ways. So artists, for an example, often work within the nightlife scene. They're musicians, producers, they have affinities with festivals and record labels. And a lot of their work actually kind of revolves around a world in which alcohol is very, very present, which is different than, say, the left-wing activists who are more likely to drink socially and perhaps drink less regularly, but then maybe drink a greater amount because their frequency is so much shorter. So again, just very, very small differences there that we were able to understand. Next slide, please. Amazing. And just to also highlight what we in Pulsar can do, we also were able to break down each of those segments, again, to really kind of understand who these people are and understand how their behaviors are going to connect to who they are. So this is one example of self-growth starters. They have top bio keywords like writer and health. They are often found in sort of major metropolitan cities. And this audience is really interested in essentially just being very focused in on their health. I would say if they were to have an aesthetic, they'd probably be closer to the clean girl aesthetic than the Barbie girl. I'm just going to say, I have no evidence to say that, but I'm going to argue that to be the case. And they discussed their drinking behaviors as kind of a recent discovery. They sort of looked in the mirror one day, or maybe someone made a passing comment to them, and they were like, "Oh, you're right. This is something that is actively hindering my health," which is something that I prioritize for myself. And that is the route in which they wanted to change it. One thing the audience can also give us, next slide, please. No, you're right. One thing the audience can also give us is an understanding of how these different segments can be, behaviors can be looked at from a consumer standpoint. So this is like, are they more or less likely to be incentivized to purchase something through advertisements? Are they particularly prone to enjoying advertisements? Are they going to respect their friends and family more if they give a recommendation? Are they quick to flash the credit card, or do they still want to like cling on to cash and use it that way? Which is less helpful in terms of working on the app, but again, was interesting to say, particularly I think for the purchaser, understanding and the purchase information, to say, okay, well, who do these people respect? Who do these people understand are giving recommendations, and how prone are they to listen to those recommendations? Was also a bit interesting. This is something else the audience can give us. Next slide, please. Thank you. And what we found is that despite their demographic similarities on a broad level, when we broke it down into those smaller subsets, we were able to see that there were segments that were very similar, but also very different across the two audiences. Keenly, there were 4 similar segments. So we can see that there is a kind of left-wing activists or a left-wing space. We have artists coming through very consistently, and we also have, very interestingly, kind of Christian conservatives and sort of Southern parents, this kind of much more religious-leaning group, which, again, I have to say, working in social media is a subset that doesn't come up as regularly. So it was really interesting to see how these people were talking about how they wanted to change their behaviors, and also why they identified it to be a problem to begin with. And just to really break down very quickly kind of how they were so similar. So we have what we've labeled social advocates, which is these kind of socially aware gamers, left-wing activists, these kind of people. These segments held politically left-wing views and were very invested in social movements that aligned with those ideals. They were very quick to share hashtags, very quick to retweet posts that supported or very much were against their political ideals in one way or the other. And this is very different from the conservative ideation. Now, these groups held Christian religious beliefs and were generally rather conservative in regards to their political views. Both their families and their beliefs act as really, really crucial and key kind of support systems for them. They really talked a lot about in Reddit posts and things how their church was fundamental in helping them understand their relationship with alcohol, or their families were the ones that came to them and said, I think there's a problem here. Let me help you. Let me support you. Let me find other resources that can help you. So these guys really like turned into their internal support systems to help facilitate their behaviors. And and lastly, there were the creatives. I'll go very, very quickly. Which include kind of traditional artists, writers, musicians, who, like I said, were exposed to alcohol both in their professional and their personal lives. So they have all 3 of these kind of groups have very different ways that they interact with alcohol. In this case, their behaviors, despite being similar, which is drinking to the point that they want to stop drinking as frequently, came about in a very, very different way. And thus they're going to experience different problems, and they're going to experience different hurdles to overcome when it comes to changing those behaviors, which is what this client really wanted to understand how they could help. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've talked a lot about the segments of the audiences, who they were, how their relationship with alcohol is different from one another. And typically that would be where a lot of clients would stop. They'd be like, thank you so much for your help. This is great. I can understand my audience more. See you next quarter with another report. But something that I thought was really, really interesting about this study was, again, we're talking about behavior, and we're talking about behavior change. This app in particular that this company were launching, one of the key methodologies that it was going to implement was CBD techniques, which anyone who doesn't know is a very, very established therapy technique, which is, supported by the NHS. There's a ton of research that supports it as a really, really helpful tool for behavior change. So I sort of had a pause and a thought, and I was like, okay, well, we've identified who these people are. They're the people who have expressed that they want help. We've been able to understand how their behaviors link to that problem and link to who they are. Now let's see if we can understand how those different motivations and barriers can interact with CBT. Essentially, are they likely to see success using academic rigor? Are they likely to see success using this tool? Because if not, they're likely to unsubscribe. Next slide, please. Amazing. Which brings us to the glorious COM-B model. There may be some people on the call who are aware of this. It's a very established model within the behavioral science space. I'm sure there'll be people out there who can do a far better job than me in explaining it and giving it its full credit. But to go over it extraordinarily briefly, the COM-B model argues that in order to create a behavior, which includes behavior change, one has to have the capability, the opportunity, and the motivation to do so, literally COM-B. And this is broken down into a couple of different ways. Capability is not only one's psychological capability, but also one's physical capability. If one wanted to run a marathon and you're a toddler, there's a very high chance that you don't have the physical capability in order to run a marathon. Despite how much you're going to train, you're going to really experience some difficulties. When you look at things like motivation, which is, I think, often a big problem for a lot of us when it comes to behavior change, it looks at automatic motivations. That's your emotions. Can you be incentivized through rewards or punishments? If you can hold off having a takeaway until the end of the week, then maybe you're more likely to eat healthy throughout the week. If you can just like reward yourself at the end, maybe you are more likely to kind of stick at it Monday through Thursday, or in my case, Monday through Tuesday. Do you have the reflective motivation? Are you not physically, see that's the wrong word, but are you able to believe in yourself that you are able to do this? Do you look at yourself and say, yes, I am someone who can change. I can have a goal and I can achieve it? Or is that something that's actually very difficult for you to hold within yourself? Because if that's something that you just don't believe you can do, that behavior change is going to be extraordinarily difficult to implement. And lastly, opportunity. This is social opportunity as well as physical. And again, to take it into a slightly less deep and serious example, if you're going to try and run a marathon and you live in the middle of London, are you going to feel comfortable running across the streets, like through Bank in the middle of the financial district? Do you have access to a gym? Do you feel safe running after dark? Those kind of things. So basically, the COM-B model argues that one has to have essentially kind of all three of these things, capability, opportunity, and motivation, in order to successfully facilitate behavior changes or to create a behavior. However, a pain point or a barrier or a buffer in one of those areas is not a disaster. Obviously, we all have them, but we have to actively find the correct problem in order to tailor make that correct solution. And one thing that is fabulous about COM-B, and thank you whoever did this, is that the academia, the research, takes it a step further and actually provides, if you have a problem with physical capability, these are the therapies that we recommend. If there's a problem with social opportunity, this is what we recommend. We recommend building more gyms. We recommend putting up more streetlights. If there's a problem with your reflective motivation, maybe talking therapy is something that would be helpful to you, or something like CBT, which is really amazing for me, because then I had a client which had a tool that used CBT, and I have a model of behavior change that literally recommends CBT for identifying and helping certain problems. So next slide, please. So what we did is we went through the data again, now with our understanding of who these people are in regards to their audience segmentation. And we coded each of them for the incentives and the barriers for behavior change across these three models. Bless my team who did this. It was a pretty long, drawn-out process, particularly because it was something that was kind of I was sort of newly imposing on the research team here. And they did a marvelous job. And we were able to find here that the people with barriers to behavior change are in the red below. So we have artists, we have those left-wing activists, we have Southern parents. The darker the color, by the way, it means they scored at least one standard deviation above the average. So they're particularly have a barrier within these spaces, or particularly are incentivized to change within these spaces. So now suddenly we have these segments that we can say, oh, these are the problems that they're experiencing. These are the barriers for their behavior change. Let's look into that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we went through each audience segment and really tried to understand how their behaviors are really being demonstrated in regards to their drinking and or sobriety. So just to take one example, we can see that with the self-growth starters, which was the example that we saw earlier, enhancing their health and well-being really motivated that segment. They really wanted to become sober to enhance their health. So sobriety wasn't the end goal for them. They really just wanted to be the most healthy and look after themselves as much as possible within that space. They were really influenced by celebrities. They really were keen followers of people like Chrissy Teigen, who spoke very candidly about her alcohol misuse at the time, and serving that as a source of inspiration. So they're very keen to inspire each other, really giving each other rewards, looking back at the combi, creating role models, which represents sort of psychological motivation, reflective motivation. And group morale was also really important to them. They sought support networks online and were likely to participate in challenges like Dry January. So again, they saw themselves having the capability to do so with the support network. If we take the next slide, please. Thank you. And then we also identified those key barriers and kind of key concerns. So what was the problem that a lot of these people were experiencing, and why were so many people unsubscribing from the app to begin with? So if we look at artists, for an example here, social pressure and performance anxiety were kind of two really key factors that contributed towards the prevalence of the way that they used alcohol within that space. And they had real difficulty in separating their public and kind of private persona. A lot of people talked about how they wanted to be sober, or they wanted to minimize their alcohol use, but they really struggled because the character on stage was a person that they, as a private individual, couldn't get to without the sort of leaning on alcohol as a support system. And thus it might be inappropriate to they might be inappropriately using alcohols or kind of across both of their lives in order to achieve the goal in the second one. So again, really interesting and understanding the behaviors are broken down in that way. Next slide, please. Thank you. I promise we're almost done. So basically, through understanding all of these different behaviors and how they interact with these motivations, did they have the opportunity, did they have the capability, we were able to basically suggest some key segments that we were like, these people are going to find your app helpful, or at least have all the signals to suggest that they might find success using something like CBT. We did not recommend anyone that was less likely to use an app. We took away people who perhaps were already using a system that went against CBT. So people who so we really wanted to be like, these are the people who were really able to facilitate and kind of see the support that you're trying to give, assuming that you can interact with them in a way that engages them, obviously. Last slide, please. Thank you. And then I think this is the last slide. I'm pretty sure basically it's just a sum up here of saying exactly which audience segments had the barriers that would be appropriate to use CBT to support. So we have those self-growth starters. So we already know, as previously mentioned, that they really incentivize their own health. They use communities, and most interestingly, they already used online communities. They supported and inspired each other online by sharing pictures of Chrissy Teigen and sharing stories of one another. So they were more likely to be receptive to getting help via their phone. Christian conservatives, in another interesting one, likely to use systems like AA and use their families to lean on. And so there is a higher chance that they are going to be, hey, I've seen this thing, can we, which has a bit of homework, can we try it out together? Can I use this to build into my support system that already exists? Artists, to use another example, always on the go, trying to facilitate not only who they are on stage or who they are in front of their clients, but also who they are in private. And so being able to have something that they could have in their hand to help them in the moment was also very likely to be helpful. So yeah, I think that's the last slide. Oh, sorry, there is one more slide. This is basically, again, just a summary of saying why we wanted to communicate how these people would be helped by this app. So we really just broke it down into a one-slider. Why them and how to best find them, how to best market to these specific people. Is that with out of house advertising? Is that with working with sober celebrities? Is that with working with micro-influencers, et cetera, et cetera? So just offering and taking it a step further into offering strategic recommendations as well. Okay, I think that's now it. Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's so in depth. I am just as interested hearing it second time round as I was hearing it first time round. So super interesting. So I know we've I'm very, very conscious of time. And I was wondering if anyone has any questions they had to pop in. Now would be the time to do it, to get it answered. There's obviously always the option to reach out to us and ask us any questions you like directly if you didn't want to do it in this forum. You mentioned, Oryelle, that I've got a question. You mentioned that you're kind of more used to working in the social and fashion area. We've got a message in the chat right now. Can we see this recording afterwards? Yes, you can. You'll be able to see all of it afterwards. The recording will be processed and then sent through to your inbox, so no worries there. I have a quick cue for you, Oryelle, about that, and I was wondering how you find the differences in behavior. Thank you. Very, very nice question. A question more. Hashtag more of a comment, not a question, from an anonymous attendee. Thank you very much. Provoking and engaging presentation. Great. So I'm passing that feedback to you, Oryelle. My question, I'll ask it because maybe other people might be interested in the answer. Is what kind of behaviors are you looking for in fashion? Because what I found in the aesthetic research is it moves so quickly, whereas kind of the research that you just showed us is more like a very stable personality type, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. So within the fashion space, you're right, it is remarkably fast. And part of the job, honestly, is just keeping up with it and just paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of behavior change, what is fashion ultimately doing is I'd argue two things. If you're within the fashion industry, if you're looking at it, if you're writing about it, then fashion is a response to what's going on in the world. You could argue that from an economic standpoint. You could argue that from a gender equality standpoint, for example, after the kind of Me Too era. And I think while Harvey Weinstein was going through trial, there was a huge uptick in people wearing like neck to toe maxi dresses with huge voluminous, almost baby doll dresses. And one could argue that that is a response to that conversation and to that kind of moment. So you could look at it.
That's really interesting.
And like look at behaviors as a response to society. And the other way is much more individual and much more consumerist, right? Like we all have to wear clothes in order to go outside. We all have to choose the clothes that we wear out of the vast variety of choices and options that there are. So then it can also become just about individual expression. You know, people in cold climates are more likely to wear warm things. People in warm climates are more likely to wear less clothing. What are they trying to express about themselves? Are they trying to express gender identity? Are they trying to express,
Mm.
who are they trying to interact with? What community are they trying to subliminally mention to other people that they're a part of? So yeah, that's the stuff
super
I like
interesting.
to talk
Yeah,
about. There's obviously a
I
part
love that.
where you're just like, who's wearing
Mm.
jeans? But
Who's wearing jeans? That's a wonderful question to ask Pulsar. Who's wearing jeans? Could you imagine the search volume? We've got a question here that I'm really keen to answer, but also would be keen to hear your answer as well. Any insight on the kind of behaviors you notice in the tech startup space from Katie? I would really like to answer that, because something that I have found is that in the tech and startup, especially emerging tech space, there is no kind of behavior that we see, because this is where new behaviors are born. So to look back at 2009 and to find that birth point of the concept of on repeat is so interesting to me, because I imagine that's the kind of thing that would have been so hard to predict. We've got two other questions and I'm keen to answer them. So we've had one come from Nasrin that says, great presentation. What kind of ethical issues do you encounter with social listening, if any? I feel like while of course any platform or media technology comes with that risk of ethical issue, our focus is on understanding the behaviors rather than kind of influencing people. We use our data to study public opinion and audiences at the kind of aggregate level. So in order to make sense of that complex reality, we do that. So I find that there are probably ethical issues to encounter. Do you have anything to say on that, Oryelle?
yeah, just to jump in on that point, another thing as well that I really want to highlight is social listening is only, well, certainly at Pulsar, only ever going to be using public data. So it's only going to be using, whenever I try and talk to my grandma about it, she gets very concerned that I'm like reading her WhatsApp, and that's not the case at all. We're only ever reading public Twitter posts, we're only ever reading public situations, public Reddit posts. And I think the way that I think about it anyway is that we there, if ever someone is atting a company, they're saying, oh hey ASOS, like you've lost my package, can you return it? So these people are already, through their behaviors, indicating that they know that this is not a private space. They know that people are going to be reading on the other end, because there are journalists writing about Twitter feeds, and ASOS, this marketing team or customer service team, is going to respond and say, oh hi, like so sorry about that. So I think that's also another thing that's really important when talking about ethics, is we all opt into social media. It's not something that we're born into, and we only ever use data that is public and is kind of openly public.
Definitely. And I would echo that entirely. You've said it very well. I've got some more questions here that I'm fielding. I've stopped, as you can see, I've stopped sharing my screen so that I can be kind of plugging myself into the chat matrix here. We've got a question about, similar as the tech startup one. I also wanted to go back to the tech startup one and indicate a piece that we have around AirPods. If you want to look that up. We also have an entire webinar in a couple of weeks on Apple. Do look out for that and sign up for that, because that's, again, we look at, obviously Apple is not an emerging tech startup, but it is one of the biggest tech companies in the world, and it's very interesting to see. I'm also seeing that the same question, but for charities or non-for-profits, from Madeline here. I'm copying a link in right now, which is our work with the Giving Revolution. We've done a lot of work with Giving Tuesday, and I think that'll be really fun for you to read about the things that come up there. And Liza is saying, do you have any insight on the kind of behaviors you notice from the senior citizens in the healthcare field? Oryelle, do you have some input? We haven't in our department done any studies on that.
I have to say that I've not done any, well, not for a while anyway, any specific work with senior citizens in the healthcare field. The last piece of work that I did was around patient journeys with variety of illnesses. So basically where people were getting their information. So were they leaning to Googling as opposed to asking their doctors? Excuse me. Sorry, were they likely to ask Reddit as opposed to going to their second appointment. So the research that I've done has been more about that space, but that sounds like a really interesting area, and I'd love to look into it more.
Definitely. There's
If
so much to
every
be, there's so
option,
much to be done
Liza, I'd
there.
love to look into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to see if there are any questions that we have unanswered. A few people are asking around, seeing the recording afterwards. Yes, the recording will be sent around via email, be easily accessible for you. I'm noting that it's 2 minutes past 5 GMT and doing some incredibly quick maths, 2 minutes past noon over there for our friends in New York and elsewhere. So I'm conscious of time and making sure that everyone gets to where they need to go. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free. That we're going to stick around. We can stick around a couple more minutes to answer anything, but I feel like everything has been answered. Please do look to the resources page on our website for more information around Pulsar. Oryelle, thank you so much again for your incredible research that you shared.
Thank
It's
you.
so interesting. And yeah, thank you everyone else for joining us. If you do have follow-up questions, please feel free to get in touch. And yes, the recording of this will be available shortly. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and thanks again, Oryelle.
Thank you. Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.